Reprise de débat, the honourable member for Halifax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just going to pick up from where my colleague left off with his answer to a question about, the perceived ideas of what a safe injection site is. And my colleague from Skeena Bulkley Valley talked about how one of the most difficult things for people working in healthcare, people working with folks on the street, with people who are trying to actually reach out to addicts and help them, whether it's to access healthcare services or addiction services or housing. One of the hardest things is getting access to these addicts. How do we actually find them? How do we get to them so we can help give them the supports that they need? And that's very true in my home community in Halifax. I mean, we have this incredible program right now called MOSH, M-O-S-H, MOSH, and it stands for Mobile Street Health. And it's a van, and there's nurses in the van, and they go around to where people are. They go to the homeless shelters. They go under bridges. They go to fields. They go where they know people who are homeless are. And try and access them and try and give them some very basic, very rough medical attention with the van that they have, and maybe talk to them about the next step. Maybe talk to them about, well, how about some treatment? We have a doctor down at the North End Community Health Centre. Maybe talk to them about, how about housing? Do you know how to access housing? Can we connect you to Halifax Housing Help? Can we connect you to Direction 180, which is our methadone clinic in Halifax? So actually being able to have access to people with addictions is a great thing, because we can give them the supports that they need. If they're looking to deal with their addiction, if they're looking to become housed, for example, or get the health care that they need, we need access to those people. And safe injection sites really are a way to access people with addictions. My colleague from Skeena Bulkley Valley cited some great statistics about how safe injection sites, Insite in particular, works, and how people do, not everyone, but if people want, they actually can get support for addiction counseling and can transition to a healthier life where they tackle their addictions. And I think that's something that we should be doing as a country, as Canadians. We should be helping. We should be thinking about ways to actually help people with addictions instead of just further marginalizing them and making it harder for them. So why are we here talking about C2? Well, we're here because of a Supreme Court of Canada decision in 2011 that decided, the Supreme Court of Canada actually decided that Insite saves lives, that it offers life-saving services, and so therefore should be exempt from Section 56 of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, CDSA. And I really think, judicial decisions are separate from who we are as legislators, but I read that decision and I think it was a victory. I think it was a victory for evidence-based science over ideology. That was 2011. Here we are. It's now the beginning of 2014, and unfortunately, I'm standing here debating a bill that is the return of that ideology, and that makes me quite sad, Mr. Speaker, that we're actually moving backwards. I think that this bill is flawed. It's deeply flawed, and it's based on an anti-drug ideology, and it's based on fears about public safety that aren't necessarily rooted in evidence, that aren't necessarily real. They're false fears, Mr. Speaker. So what are these fears? Well, we heard my colleague from Guelph actually was talking about some of these false fears, that people think that, there's these raging addicts going around in our communities, and then they get to go into these posh little sites and put their feet up and actually access drugs, and it's like a one-stop shopping for addicts. People think that if there's a safe injection site, there will be increased drug use. People think that there's going to be more drug users on the street. When I say people, not all people, Mr. Speaker, but those are the false fears that exist. They're false fears that drug users are going to terrorize our children, they're going to terrorize our communities. And why do I say that? Why do I say that these false fears are out there? Well, because if you go to the Conservative Party website, you will see that they're trying to capitalize on these fears. There's this beautiful page, and I say beautiful with a heavy dose of sarcasm, Keep Heroin Out of Our Backyards, and it's a fundraising ask. You can sign up, and the big donate button is there to donate to the Conservative Party of Canada. picture of a couple needles on the ground and people milling about, not people, in fancy dress shoes or high-heeled shoes. These are the shoes of drug dealers. It's apparent. Again, heavy dose of sarcasm there. And it's incredible. It's fear-mongering. It's fear-mongering. And there's a Facebook site that goes with it. And if you have some time and you want to, get yourself quite exercised about what the state of the country is in, you read these comments filled with vitriol and more fear-mongering. It's incredible. I pulled one comment that said, addiction is not a health problem, it's stupidity. And the vitriol extends, bizarrely, it descends into the civil service should be gagged and put on the EI line. I don't really know where that comes from. But it's out there, and that fear-mongering is happening, and it's being fueled by the Conservatives. Sure, people may say, I don't want a safe injection site in my backyard. But let me tell you about my backyard, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to talk to you about my backyard in Halifax. My office is on Gottingen Street. Gottingen is a beautiful, strong, vibrant street full of community action, community togetherness. I love the street that my office is on. But we have our share of social problems. It's a poor neighborhood, a historically poor neighborhood. There is drug use in my community. There is sex work in my community. There is a lot of poverty in this community. And the last time this bill was up in the House, I spoke to it as well. And the week before, it was a riding week. We were at home in our constituencies. And I, just purely by chance that it happened that week, I rode my bike to my office, and there on the ground, right at my bike lock, was a needle. And I dutifully, went inside, got something to pick it up with, brought it down. 3 doors down is the community health center. I know they have a Sharps bin there. And that's the reality in my community. So if my community decides that it is better to have a safe injection site, why can't my community make that decision free of interference from the Conservatives and free of fear-mongering from the Conservatives? I was chatting with some folks from Metro Nonprofit Housing Association. They're actually across the street from my office. And they were telling me, I didn't know this, but they were telling me that they and other community organizations in my community rallied together to put a Sharps container behind sort of the street that's right behind my office, because it's there's not a lot of action, there's not a lot of back and forth traffic, and there aren't a lot of people on that street. And so it turns out to be a place where people do use intravenous drugs. There's privacy, there's bushes, it's sort of ideal if you're looking for a place to sort of get away and do something, outside of the eyes of the public. And so they rallied together and said, look, there's so much drug use happening right behind these offices or these buildings. Let's put a Sharps container there. So at the very least, the kids aren't walking around and there's needles and there could be an accident. And at first I thought, well, that's a great idea, actually. If there are needles, let's give people a place to put those needles. So it seemed like a good idea to me. But then I found out that what happened was people broke into the Sharps container. They broke into the Sharps container to steal dirty needles. What kind of desperation must you feel that you break into a Sharps container to steal dirty needles? What kind of low are you at? Where are you when you think that's a good idea, when you act on that, when that's your reality? So I don't think that's an awesome thing about my town, right? But it is real. It exists. And it's not going to go away if we just ignore it and don't talk about it. So if my community says, enough's enough, we don't want Sharps containers in the cafe down the street anymore. We don't want Sharps containers in all of these community organizations along Gottingen. We don't want people shooting up behind the office, behind the health center. We actually want to take care of people and offer them the supports that they may need. We want to help them if they want to transition away from addiction. Who's to say that we can't do that? I'll finish with a quote from the Supreme Court of Canada. Insight saves lives. Its benefits have been proven. I think that speaks volumes, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The Honourable Member for Kootenay-Columbia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her speech. And having been involved in dealing with drug investigations a number of times. I understand where people are coming from with regards to Insight, but part of the problem with Insight, and it's not per se the building, the problem is that there isn't 1.1 gram of heroin that can be purchased in this country legally. So the problem is you have to bring it to that site in an illegal form to inject it legally within that site. So to say that there's no drug dealing going around in whether it be East Vancouver or Halifax is really not a fair statement to make, because it is still happening. It's just a matter of where they're injecting. So I guess the question boils down to the fact of with Insight or any of these sites is that is there a way that your government would see or your party would see how you ensure that the drug that they're purchasing is safe, because there's no way of proving that right now, and how would you do that?
The honourable member for Halifax, I'd ask all members to direct their comments to the chair, not to other members of Parliament, please.
We are rusty, aren't we? Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his question. And yeah, that's a good question, and that's complicated. This is not easy stuff, right? It is not black and white. There is a whole lot of shades of gray here, and so we figure it out. Yes, there will be people still dealing drugs if there are safe injection sites. Yeah, there will be. But right now, there are people dealing drugs. So we have a choice of having a community where there are drug dealers, where there are drug transactions, and people die, or we have a community where there are these drug transactions and maybe not as many people die. And maybe one person decides to take advantage of addiction services and is no longer an addict. Maybe one. And if there's just one, I consider that to be a victory. So it's not simple, right? I'm not standing here to say, like, we've got the magic bullet here. We know exactly how we're going to do this and how it should roll out. But I do know in my heart that the first thing we have to do is try and save people's lives. And if that's what safe injection sites do, then I'm all for it.
Well said. Question et commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable député de Abitibi-Témiscamingue.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Comme ma collègue députée en a parlé, souvent il y a des inquiétudes des parents qui viennent sur le sujet quand on parle des sites d'injection supervisés. Donc, j'aimerais savoir si elle pense que c'est mieux pour un enfant de voir un bâtiment où est-ce qu'il n'est pas trop sûr de comprendre ce qui se passe à l'intérieur, mais que ça se passe à l'intérieur, ou d'assister, sans le vouloir, à voir un toxicomane qui s'injecte des drogues dans le parc où est-ce qu'il va jouer, ou retrouver quelqu'un mort qui a fait une overdose dans le parc où est-ce qu'il va jouer. Est-ce que c'est mieux que ces comportements-là soient à l'intérieur d'un bâtiment ou que ça se passe peut-être en avant de ses yeux sans que ses parents aient pu le contrôler?
Honorable député de Halifax.
Merci à ma collègue pour sa question. J'ai un exemple. Ici à Ottawa, pas au Parlement, mais ici à Ottawa, il y a un exemple où peut-être ça peut régler les peurs. The fears des gens dans nos communautés. In Ottawa, there's actually, it's called Campaign for Safer Consumption Sites and the Drug Advocacy League, and they actually came together and they opened a mock injection site where the community could come in and see what it was all about, right? Instead of fear-mongering with the pictures of the needles rolling around, they said, look, this is what it is. Come talk to our nurses. Come talk to our health experts and people who think this is a good idea. Come on in and see what it is that happens in here. And they get a little kit. They get to see a little kit of what would be given to someone who accessed this site. So it's a mock site which helps demystify, which helps dispel those myths, where you can ask those questions that are in us. We are afraid sometimes. That's okay. So we can go in and ask those questions and find out and get educated on the issue instead of just being told that we should live our lives in fear. Right? Let's get educated on these issues. And I think what the Campaign for Safer Consumption Sites have done is really a remarkable thing. Not everybody in Ottawa agrees, but they've created a safe space for debate and discussion, and I think that's a far cry from what the Conservatives are doing.